within Azure is the Azure Security Center. And this is really a great place to start when you start examining the security of all of your Azure-based solutions. And what the Security Center is, it's a monitoring service that provides threat protection across all of your services, and you can even connect this not only to Azure, but also to your on-premises data centers. It provides continuous monitoring. So again, this is through all your cloud workloads, and it's automatically applying new security services as it's coming online. And because it's continuously monitoring all your services, you're going to get these security assessments that allows you to identify potential vulnerabilities in your workload. And one of the best things is it provides just-in-time access control for these ports, which helps reduce your attack, any type of surface attacks, because it's ensuring that your network only allows traffic that you require. Now, this comes in two different options. The first one is the free tier, and this is something that's automatically included in your Azure subscription. This is limited to only assessments and recommendations of your Azure resources. So if you are interested in connecting this to your on-premises data centers, you may want to look at the standard tier. Now, this tier provides a full suite of security-related services, and this includes continuous monitoring, threat detection, just-in-time access control, and so much more. So, as you are setting up security within your Azure environment, it's important to know what you need to protect your resources. Let's go ahead and jump into the portal really quick. You had an opportunity to explore the portal yesterday with Lorraine, but I would like to go to the Security Center. So you have a couple of options the way that you can get there. Again, you can either search it from the portal menu, all services, the search bar up here. But the nice thing is the Security Center will be on your toolbar on your main home page. So let's go ahead and go to the Security Center. And this Security Center overview is going to be for the subscriptions that I have selected. So just remember, you can see your directory up here and what subscriptions I currently have. So I am going to choose to look at our Contoso hotels. So let's go ahead and filter to that. And what it's going to do is it's going to provide me with an overall security score. And you can see it's based off of policy and compliance, our resource hygiene, threat protection, and so on. Now, for the exam, you won't have to go in and identify any issues or how to figure out how to remediate them. More, I just wanted to show you what you can find in here. So for example, if we wanted to go down to our resources, security, and hygiene, we can actually see, wow, there, according to the recommendations from the Security Center, we actually have 71 unhealthy resources. Let's take a look at what they might be. All right, so as we go through, we can actually see we have some vulnerabilities. Now, for example, we want to do a vulnerability assessment done on our SQL servers. And you see this little button here that says Quick Fix. The great thing about the Quick Fix is it will automatically go through the remediation steps for you. So you don't have to do anything at all to follow through on that remediation. Now, once you see the remediation steps, you can see the logic, so the Quick Fix, the logic behind it, or if you wanted to take the steps yourself, you can do that here through manual remediation. Now, with any of the recommendations in the Security Center, whether they're policy or security hygiene recommendations, it is up to you whether or not how you would like to address them. As with anything with Azure, whether it's Monitor or the Security Center, all of this here is to give you support and it's all based off of the best practices from Microsoft. But again, this is a really great tool, especially as a little bit later in this module, when we take a look at governance, your policy score here will let you know where you are with any of your other compliance offerings or where you are with your policies that have been implemented. We'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. All right. So For the Security Center, just know that this is really your hub for everything that's security related within your Azure environment. And if you do enroll in the standard tier, you can also connect that to your on-premises environment. All right, so again, with the Security Center, you have your policy compliant, you're getting your continuous assessments, and the tailor recommendations. I think that's probably my personal favorite part about Azure Security is it's all tailored recommendations to what I have deployed, and it's protecting me against potential threats. All right. Next, we have Azure Sentinel. And this is really great because think of this as a bird's eye view across your entire enterprise. So really, what it's doing is taking all of this history and experience that Microsoft has in security and putting it to work for you in your own enterprise. So it allows you to implement threat detection and your responses through artificial intelligence. So that way you're not having to maintain any type of infrastructure setup and maintenance with security. So it can be elastically, so remember it's automatic, so you can elastically scale to meet your security needs while still being mindful of costs and in some ways lowering costs. So the way that this does this is it's actually collecting data from across your entire enterprise. So there's a number of connectors here, whether it's Office 365, Azure Active Directory, Advanced Threat Protection, or the Cloud App Security. It is collecting data everywhere. Now, once it detects that threat, it has that AI built in through the investigation and detect phase where it's looking for that suspicious activity and then it's responding through that automatic protection. So it's taking a lot of that work and maintenance off your desk and moving it towards the artificial intelligence that's built into Azure Sentinel. All right, so just know that Azure Sentinel is basically, imagine as a big giant dome protecting your entire enterprise and any other thing that might be connected to your cloud products. All right, so those are two of the ways that you can protect yourself globally within Azure. Now let's talk a little bit, how are you protecting your secrets, your certificates, any type of keys? And that's where we get into Azure Key Vault. Now, Azure Key Vault is a centralized location within Azure where you can store all of your certificates, your keys, passwords, anything like that. And then you get to control who has access, who has permission, and you can actually see the log of who's accessed it and when. Now, when we think about when you might use this, one of the things is if you have any controlled access to tokens, passwords, certificates, APIs, or any other secrets that your organization uses, instead of having to share what those are, you can actually build a secret key, then that can be used in templates. So yesterday with Lorraine, when you built out that virtual machine, you saw that you can download the JSON template. If you were to download that JSON template directly from after she created it, you would actually be able to see the username and password right in that template. And that's not so secure, is it? If you have a standardized password that you use for your virtual machines, that's not something you necessarily want to share. But instead, you can share, you can set up a secret key through Azure Key Vault that will then be loaded into that JSON template. That way, other people can take advantage of that template without knowing any of your passwords. All right. So key thing for this is that you get to monitor the access and use of anyone who is downloading or accessing these company secrets. You can control who can see what. And it's really great because you can integrate Key Vault with other Azure services, whether it's a storage account, container registries, event hubs, and so many more. So what I would like to show you just real quick is how you create a Key Vault with a secret. All right, now that we're back in the portal, remember Key Vault is just like any of our other services. You can choose to access it from the portal menu, the search bar. I happen to have it in my recents, so I am going to go ahead and select Key Vaults and then add. Now, like any other service, we do need to select our subscription. as well as a resource group. I'm going to create a new resource group because everything we do here today will be on the same life cycle. So I like to keep everything organized by life cycle. Now, as far as the Key Vault name, it does need to be globally unique because, again, that's how the key is going to be pulled. So I'm going to name this AZ900 Key Vault Demo. All right. Again, you will use your own naming convention. So this is just one that I'm using for the purpose of the test. As far as my region goes, I'm going to select East US, and then pricing tier, I'm going to select standard. This is premium is if you wanted to use the HSM backed keys where you're not sharing that with anyone else. But again, for the purpose of this demo, we're going to just stick with the standard pricing tier. For the AZ900 level exam, you won't need to get into the access polling networking. I do always like to point out that you can add tags. Remember when we looked at the virtual machines yesterday, you have the option to add tags, which is just that name value pair, adding that metadata, really good for billing and reporting options. So let's go ahead and move into validation, and we're going to select review and create. Give me an overview of everything. We have that option for that JSON template if we'd like. I don't need it here, so let's click create. Now that deployment is automatically in progress. The Key Vault isn't very complicated, so we'll just give it a minute here to deploy. All right, and our deployment is complete. You see I got it up in here in my notification bar, but because we didn't leave the deployment page, I'm going to go ahead and select Go to Resource. Now we are in our Key Vault now. We have a couple of options when we are uploading any keys, secrets, or certificates. And you can see we have our options here underneath settings. Now I do want to point out one thing with certificates. One of the great benefits of it is that it makes it easier to enroll and renew certificates from public certificate authorities. And it allows you to scale up and replicate in different regions that actually use any type of standard certificate management tools. I'm not going to get into much more detail other than that, but just know if you do use those certificates, Key Vault is a great solution for you. Let's go ahead and select keys, secrets. And I am going to select generate or import. And this is where I am going to create a new key. So I'm going to call this AZ900 secret. All right. And the value, I have our super secret value here. And I can say super. So I have our super secret value. All right, having fun with this, of course, you would have your naming convention and it wouldn't be as simple as this, but this is where you can select an activation date or an expiration date. I'm not gonna do that here, but if I only wanted this secret to be available for maybe the next week, I can choose to set that expiration. All right, it's enabled. I'm gonna click create. All right, the AZ secret has been created. Let's go in there. Now, when we see the current version, you can see I have my secret identifier here. And part of the reason why I needed that unique value is you see in the URL here, this allows me to share the secret with the applications that need it without actually giving away what the super secret value is. Now, because I am an admin in this account, I have access to this button that shows secret value. If I did not have the right permissions or the access within Azure, I would not be able to see this. But I'm going to go ahead and show the secret value. You can see Azure is the best. So that was the secret value I did for our demo. But now what it does is the Azure Key Vault has logged that I have revealed the secret value. So if maybe I was doing something less than good and I was collecting those values, this would actually log, and if I wanted to as an admin go in, I could see it. So that is the Key Vault. The key thing for the exam is make sure that you know that it is for secret management, key management, and certificate management. Moving right along to some of our other security options, the last one I talk about before we get into securing your network is going to be the Azure Dedicated Host. Now, what this is, it's a service that's actually providing a physical server, and it can be hosting one or more virtual machines, but it's only dedicated to a single Azure subscription. Remember yesterday when Lorraine went over with you with the cloud computing basics, that is where you were just looking at public cloud computing, is that you are renting that physical infrastructure from a cloud computing provider. And they are providing that physical infrastructure to multiple customers. Now, depending on the security or the needs within your environment or for your resources, you may want to look into an Azure dedicated host. Now, the dedicated hosts, what they are is they're the same physical servers that are in the Azure data centers, but it is just for your subscription. So you can provision this dedicated host within a region, an availability zone, or a fault domain, and then you get to choose to place VMs directly into those hosts, and then you get to set up any configuration that you like that best meets your needs. Now, this is really good for a couple of reasons. This provides isolation at the physical server level, so no other VMs are going to be placed on that host. So they're all deployed in the same data center, they share the same network and the underlying storage. So this gives you a lot of control on the physical host level. Same thing with maintenance, it gives you control over maintenance. So part of the benefit of using a cloud service provider like Azure is that you're not responsible for that ongoing maintenance. However, while the majority of maintenance has very little impact on your virtual machines, there are some sensitive workloads where even a second of pause can have an impact. So with these dedicated hosts, you get to opt into a maintenance window, which can potentially reduce the impact to your service. And then the last thing is, one of the benefits is that you can bring your own licenses using the Azure hybrid benefit. So again, using the hybrid benefit provides you with cost savings and allows you to take advantage of existing Windows and SQL licenses that you can bring to Azure. Just the one thing that I do want to make sure that you know, if you are wanting to use a virtual scale set, they are not currently supported on those dedicated hosts. But if you do want that control at the physical level, definitely take a look at Azure dedicated hosts. So we've had an opportunity to look at some of the security options within Azure. Now let's talk about how you secure your network and how you're protecting your resources. So before we can get too deep into that, I want to introduce you to a concept called defense in depth. And what this is a strategy that employs a series of mechanisms that are designed to slow the advance of an attack that's aimed at acquiring unauthorized access to your information, your data, your resources. But think of it this way. Each layer provides protection, so even if one of these layers is breached, there's a layer right below it to help prevent any further exposure. Now, what Microsoft does, it applies a layered approach to security both in the physical data center and across all of the Azure services. So really, the objective in defense in depth is there to protect and prevent information from being stolen from individuals who aren't authorized to use it. So what you can see here is that on this graph, data is the final layer. So you have all these layers starting with physical security that even if one layer is breached, you have the next layer protecting it. And that's really how you want to look at defense in depth. Now, Azure has a lot of tools and services in place to help protect your data, but I want to make sure you understand that security is a shared responsibility. Now, how much of that responsibility falls on Microsoft versus how much falls on you as a customer? Well, that depends on what type of cloud service that you're using. So when we look at the shared security model for security, you'll see that there's some overlap from when we looked at it from the version of IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS that Lorraine covered yesterday. Now, in your on-premises data center, you are responsible for everything from the physical data center all the way up to the data and governance. Now, when you start to look at IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, specifically starting with infrastructure as a server, that's, where you are leveraging the lowest level of service, and you're just asking Azure to create virtual machines and virtual networks. So at this level, it's still your responsibility to patch and secure your operating systems and software, but you're also responsible for configuring to make sure that your network is secure. Now, you're asking Azure to just take care of the physical level. So you're asking them to protect the physical host, the physical network, and the physical data center. But outside of that, you're responsible for everything else. Now, moving to platform as a service, you're outsourcing several of the security concerns there. So Azure is taking care of the operating system and most of the foundational software like database management systems. And with here, everything is updated with the latest security patches. And you can even integrate it with Azure Active Directory for access controls. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But because you're not building out the entire infrastructure, you're doing more of that point and click or running automated scripts, you're able to bring very secure systems up and down and scale them as needed. But you'll notice the application protection, it's actually a shared responsibility. So it's not a full pass off to Microsoft. Whereas with the operating system, yes, PaaS, you're no longer worried about the underlying operating system. But you do still have some shared responsibility with the network, the application, and the identity and access. And then finally, with software as a service, you're outsourcing almost everything. So here in this case, they're taking care of the security with the application, the network controls. But again, you have that shared responsibility with identity and directory infrastructure. But I want you to look closely at this graph. No matter the cloud deployment type, you always own your data and your identities. And you're responsible for helping secure those data and identities. And I just want you to know, regardless of whatever type of deployment that you select, you are always going to be responsible for the data, the endpoints, accounts, and account management. So it is a shared responsibility when it comes to security, but those 4 points are always going to belong to you. Now, looking back at this defense in depth, I'm going to focus first on the perimeter layer. The network layer. So we're going to talk about the how to protect your network first. So one of the first ways that you can protect your network is with network security groups. And essentially what network security groups do, it allows you to filter traffic to and from your Azure resources on your virtual networks. And that's the key thing here. This is traffic that is already on your virtual network. All right, because we are on the network level and it's protecting it to and from. So what you can do is you get to choose to set inbound and outbound rules that are filtering on a number of different levels, whether it's destination, the IP address, the port, and the protocol. Now you get to add multiple rules. There are a whole bunch already automatically configured in your Azure environment, but you get to add more as you need them. Now, you cannot delete rules, but you can override them. So, rules with a higher priority will override rules with a lower priority. So, for example, let's go ahead and jump into the portal. I'm going to go ahead and go to my virtual machine. And let's go ahead and open up one that I've already created. All right, and we'll go over to networking. And what we can see here is I have my network security group. So now if I wanted to add, we can see I have my network security group. This was automatically created with my virtual machine. So when you went through the deployment yesterday with Lorraine, you saw that that network security group was automatically created. But what I can't have here is I have all of my inbound security rules and my outbound security rules. Now this is where I can choose to add or remove. You can see my priority level here. These are ones that are automatically created. So when I created this virtual machine, you could see that I opened up the RDP traffic. Now that overrode any of the other inbound rules that I had because it has a higher priority level. You cannot have two rules with the same priority level, but remember, you can override any of the default rules with the newer, higher priority rules. So, looking back at our defense in-depth graph, with network security groups, this is on the network level. Now we're moving up a level to the perimeter level. So, at the perimeter level, we have the Azure Firewall. Now, what this is a fully managed cloud-based network security service that is there to protect your virtual network resources. So this is on the perimeter. You only need to worry about one because you have unlimited cloud scalability and it's already highly available. It's connected to Azure Monitor, so all of that reports that are coming in from your firewall straight into Azure Monitor. But again, this is perimeter. So it's protecting any of that inbound, outbound traffic. So whether it's for your HTTPS protocols or your non-HTTPS protocols, whether it's remote desktops, secure shell, file transfer protocol, all of this is providing outbound network level protection for all your ports, all your protocols, and all application level protection. So, firewall, it's your first line of defense, within perimeter. There is also the Azure Application Gateway, and what this is a load balancer that includes a web application firewall that's providing protection from common known vulnerabilities in websites. So really, this is there to protect your HTTP traffic. So firewall, perimeter layer. Another piece of perimeter layer protection that's offered is the distributed denial of service. So with the distributed denial of services, well, before we talk what this protection is, let's talk about what an attack is. So a DDoS attack, distributed denial of service attack, is when there is an overwhelming amount of traffic sent to your Azure network or your resources, and essentially it overwhelms your resources, making them slow, or it can even take them down completely. Now, where this is different from the Azure Firewall is just verifying, yep, this is traffic, this is allowed traffic, this isn't. Where the DDoS protection is going, is this valid traffic? So what it's doing is it's going through and preventing any unwanted traffic from coming in, so that way it doesn't have a chance to take down any of your services. Now there are two tiers when it comes to the DDoS protection. You have your basic tier. Now this is automatically included with Azure, so you don't have to worry about setting up your DDoS protection. That is coming right to you. But there is also the standard service. Now, the standard service is not automatically included. It is an additional cost. But what this does is it's providing an additional mitigation capabilities that are very specific to your virtual network resources. So there really isn't any type of application change that you need to make, but I need you to know that this isn't something that's getting applied to your entire subscription. It is very specific to your Azure resources. It can be a little bit pricey, and so my personal recommendation is you should really only use it on business critical applications just to avoid that price. Most people find that the DDoS, the basic tier, is more than enough to meet their needs. So remember, as we go through this, defense in depth is really the overriding theme I want you to think about. We have our NSGs, our network security groups, with Azure Firewall protecting us on we have the network security groups protecting us on the network level, the Azure Firewall and DDoS protecting us on the perimeter layer. So just think of defense in depth as the overriding theme. Security is a multi-layer, multi-vector concern. Threats are coming from all over the place, and It may be places we don't expect, and they can come in strength that can surprise anyone. So just know security is a deep and complex topic. So whatever your approach to your cloud security is, just make sure that it's an ongoing conversation and there's ongoing education because it's changing every day. Like I said, we have some of our advanced role-based classes that go into full weeks or multiple days of security. And that wraps up Module 4. It was a pretty big module. And like I said, we just scratched the surface of when it comes to security within Azure. We took a look at defense in depth and how you can secure both your network and your perimeter layer, as well as securing your secrets through Key Vault. And then finally, we looked at the Security Center, which is a great resource and it's free within Azure to make sure that you are always up to date with the latest and greatest security features, as well as to make recommendations just to take you a little bit further. With that being said, now that we've talked about some of the security aspects, let's get into Module 5, which will talk about some of the identity features and making sure that those who are supposed to have access can get into Azure and those who can't or who aren't supposed to get into Azure don't have access. We'll also look at some governance tools within your Azure environment as well and how you can implement policies just to make sure that everybody is working in Azure the way that your company has determined. And then finally, we'll close out that module with looking at some of our privacy and trust within Azure, so that way you know how we at Microsoft are handling and protecting your data. We have a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So with Module 5, like I said, we're going to talk about identity governance, privacy, and compliance. We looked at how we're securing your Azure environment, but in Module 5, we'll look at some of the identity services that are available to you, the governance features, as well as the privacy and compliance that Microsoft offers you as a customer. So let's look at first some of those core identity services. Now, one of the first things that we need to talk about before we can talk about anything with identity services is the concept of authentication and authorization, because really, they're the foundation of all of the different identity services that are available. So first, we have authentication. And what it does, it identifies the person is who they say they are. So they're going to request some type of credentials, and this could be a username, password, but really this is creating their identity. Then we have authorization. Now, once someone has been authenticated and you verified who they are who they say they are, now you're going to determine what level of access they have. And so just because they're able to come in or log into the service, they may not have access to everything. Now, the way that I look at this is I think of airport travel. So with authentication, when I go to the airport to catch a plane, I have to present my boarding pass and my license at the security desk. And they're going to look at the license and say, yep, this is Chelsea Lee, and yep, this boarding pass is valid for an upcoming flight. And so they have authenticated that I can come in and go through the security gates. Now, once I'm through the security gates, that doesn't mean I get to hop on whatever plane I'd like. If I'm going to Kansas, I can't change my mind and say, you know what, I'm going to go to Bali. No, I'm only authorized for a specific flight, which is at a specific gate on a specific plane at a specific time. And guess what? Even when I get on the plane, I have a specific seat. So I'm only authorized for a very specific trip. I don't get to pick and choose. So that's how I like to think of authorization and authentication. Authentication, I am who I say I am. And authorization is once I'm in the door, what can I do? Where can I go? All right. So that's really important as you get into identity services. Then with identity services, you may have heard of multi-factor authentication. Now, multi-factor authentication is just another layer of security that is available for basically protecting your Azure environment or any type of Azure or any type of environment. So essentially, it determines your identity by requiring 2 or more elements for full authentication. There's 2 things that you can ask for. Something you know, which can be a username or a password or an answer to a security question. Something you possess, which could be a mobile app, maybe it receives a notifications or a token generating device. Or it can be something you are, and this is like usually some type of biometric property. So it can be a fingerprint scan or a face scan. We see that's pretty common on a lot of phones. So what this does is when you implement multi-factor authentication, essentially it increases security because it limits the amount of credentials that could be exposed. So someone might find out your password, but it's unlikely that they would also not only have your password, but maybe have your token generating device, or they have your password and they have your face. So again, by using both of these, you're just adding that next level of protection. Now, currently, Azure only supports something that you know and something that you possess. At this time, there is no biometric properties of something that you are. So an example of multi-factor authentication can be when I log into my Azure portal as a Microsoft employee, it asks not only for my username and password, but then it's going to send a notification to my phone. And then since I have my mobile phone set up, I have to log into my phone and validate, yep, this is me attempting to log in. Now, this isn't part of the multi-factor authentication, but to log into my phone, it has to scan my face. So again, this multi-factor authentication just adds another level of security. You can use it as part of some of the other Azure service offerings, or it can be purchased as a standalone. So contact your Microsoft account rep to discuss more, but just know that this provides another layer of security. So now that we have the foundations of identity services, let's talk about Active Directory, or specifically Azure Active Directory. And you might be pausing going, wait, hang on, did this replace my other Active Directory? And it did not. Azure Active Directory can be used in addition to your regular Active Directory. Now, Azure Active Directory is the cloud-based identity and access management service. And it can be used for both your external resources, whether it's Office 365, the Azure portal, or a number of other software as a service applications. But you can also use it as an internal resource, whether you're controlling access on your corporate network or your intranet, or maybe you have in-house apps that you have developed for your organization. So there's a number of different services that Azure Active Directory can supply. So the first one is going to be authentication. Remember, that's proving who you are, who you say you are. And so again, some of the benefits of using this through Azure Active Directory, you can have self-service password reset, multi-factor authentication. You can even set up a custom banned password list, so that way you don't have anyone setting their password to password or password 123, but it's adding that next level of protection. It also can be used for single sign-on, which is so incredibly nice, but it's also can be a curse. Because with single sign-on, I can tend to forget my password because with a single click, because, I log into my computer with my face, sometimes I may forget some of my passwords. But with single sign-on, it makes it so you only have to remember one username and one password, and you have access to multiple applications. And this is really good for your administrators, because if a user changes roles or leaves the organization, you can access modification that's tied to that single identity. So that way you're not having to run around and disable a whole bunch of different accounts. From an application management standpoint, you get to choose. You can use Azure Active Directory to manage not only your cloud apps, but your on-premises apps. And you can do this through the My Apps portal, or you might see this as the Access panel. But again, it's there to help manage all of your apps, whether you're storing them in the cloud or on premises. With business to business and business to customers, essentially you get to manage your guest users or your customers, basically how they access your corporate data if they're a vendor, or as a customer, you get to control how they sign in, sign up, or how basically they manage their profile with your app services. And then finally, with device management, that manages how your cloud or your on-premises devices access your corporate data. Now, when we talk about access, we have this concept or this tool called Conditional Access used with Azure Active Directory. And essentially what this does, it allows your organization to have different identity signals to determine what apps, what data users can access depending on the type of user they are, their group membership, where they're located, what device, the application, if there's any type of risk. So essentially, Conditional Access uses Azure Active Directory to make decisions based on these organizational policies. So think about them at a very simple level. They're if-then statements. If I am logging in from the corporate network on a corporate computer, then I can access the data. Now, if I am logging in on a corporate device, but I am on a different network, then require multi-factor authentication. If they pass, then allow access to the data. Or if a user is not allowed in, they're not authorized to log in from a certain device or a certain location, then you can block that access. So essentially, let's say, for example, you have a payroll manager. They want to access the payroll application. Well, they're required to perform multi-factor authentication to access it. So this allows your administrators to empower your employees to be productive wherever they want while still protecting the organization's assets. So this allows you to apply the right access controls when needed to keep your organization secure and really to stay out of your users' way when it's not needed. So Conditional Access is just another great tool within Azure Active Directory. So let's now talk about, we've looked at some of identity services. Let's look at some of the governance methodologies that are built into Azure. Now that we've had a chance to look at some of our other identity services, such as Azure Active Directory, let's explore a little bit of role-based access control, or you might hear it also as RBAC. So role-based access control provides fine-grained access management for your Azure resources, which gives you as an administrator control to grant the rights that your users need to do their jobs. Now, role-based access control is included in all Azure subscriptions, so there is no additional price for that. But when you think about the roles within Azure, you may want to segregate duties. And what that means is, a user, for example, may only be able to manage virtual machines in a single subscription, where you may have another user who's there to manage virtual networks. Or let's say, for example, you have a database administrator and they manage all the SQL databases in a single subscription. Essentially, what you're doing is you're giving your users enough access to do their job, but no more. And that's really key when it comes to role-based access controls, is that you only want to grant the amount of access that a user needs to perform their jobs. So instead of trying to give everyone unrestricted permissions and saying, run wild, you want to be able to protect your resources in your subscription. So you only want to allow certain actions at a certain scope level. And, this is so important. You're granting the lowest level of privilege that they need to do their work. You can always add permissions. Sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to take them away. So let's go ahead and look at what the different roles are. Let's switch back into the portal. Now, with role-based access controls, you can apply this at the subscription level, the management group level, the resource group level, or individual resources. I am going to work on the subscription level. So I have my subscriptions right here under my Azure services. And in my demo account, I have a single subscription applied. So let's go ahead and click on that. And your access control is managed underneath overview. You'll see it on no matter what resource. You'll see access control or IAM. So I always think of it as I am who I say I am. But this is where you can add different roles. So let's go ahead and look at the different role assignments that you can add. So when you select a role, you have a choice of owner. So you can see this grants full access. So this is doing absolutely everything. I would be very, very, very careful with owner, because then they can kick you out and take away your access. Whereas contributor, it basically allows you to have access to all resources, but you can't assign any roles. So if you needed someone with, all power, but you don't want them to have the ability to change roles, contributor might be a good one. Whereas with reader, you can't make any changes, but you can view, and you can see there are a number of different roles already built in. Now, if you don't see a role that works for you, you can actually even create your own roles, all right? And then you can assign, at what access level do you want them to have. Now, say for example, I wanted to add a contributor. Now this is my demo account, so I am going to add my work email address, and you can see that this user will be sent an email that enables them to collaborate on the default directory. And so I'm going to go ahead and select my email. I'm going to select save. So that sent an email to my work email address, letting me know that I now have access as a contributor to this entire subscription, which means that I can access all the resource groups and all the resources in there. Now, for example, if I wanted to look at my role assignments and I maybe wanted to change the role, I can remove. So if I wanted to remove this role assignment, great. Now, even though I have that email, I've now just revoked my role as a contributor. And you can look at all the different roles that are available, add a different role. So if there was one that was like, a role, these are all built in, it doesn't meet, I can choose to add and have that customized access. And again, you can do this at the subscription level, you can do this at the resource group level, and you can also do it at the individual resources level. So this is just one way how to, again, add that fine-grained access management to your environment. All right. Another really great governance tool that is built into Azure is going to be resource locks. Now, as you add different contributors and editors and readers, and maybe you even add an owner, resource locks are such a great tool from preventing any type of accidental deletion or modification, because one thing that you need to know, when you delete a resource or a resource group, there is no going back. There is no undo. There is no recycle button. You cannot go get it back. So accidental deletions are a very big deal, or accidental modifications are a very big deal because you can't undo them. So how do you protect your resources? You protect them through resource locks. And so with resource locks, you cannot delete, which essentially the only thing that you can't do, you can read them, you can update them, you can change them, you can add to them, you just can't delete them. So it protects from your accidental deletion, but not so much from the accidental modification. So that's where we get into our read-only locks. With your read-only locks, this makes it so you can read it, you can view it, but you can't make changes, you can't add anything to it, you can't remove anything, and you sure as heck can't delete it. So let's look at what that looks like in the portal. So going back into the portal, go back to the home page. Let's actually look at the virtual machine level. No, changed my mind. We're going to go to the resource group level. So I'm going to go over here to my resource groups. And let's go to my AZ900. All right. So we can see in this resource group, all I have is my Key Vault demo that we made earlier. But I am going to add a lock. And the way that you add a lock is down here on the bottom under Settings, select Locks, and I'm going to select Add. Now, looking at the lock type, remember you have two, read only and delete. So let's start with delete because that's the least restrictive. So I'm going to just call it do not delete. You can add any notes if you want. Now, because I am an admin and my access allows me to add and delete locks, I can add and delete locks to any resources. Again, depending on the access, the role-based access that you provide to your users, they may be able to add locks, they may be able to remove them. Again, that is a control thing. Now, when I point out with the resource groups, one of the things I want you to understand is when you apply a lock at a resource group level or a subscription level, it does have that parent-child inheritance relationship. So if you apply something at a subscription level, it will flow down to all the resource groups and then all the resources. So since I'm applying a lock at the resource group level, I have now locked all my resources in my resource group. So let's go back to the overview here. And I put a do not delete. So what that means is I can go add anything. So let's go ahead and add a storage account because those are nice and quick to deploy. So I'm going to add a storage account. I am going to go to my AZ900. I'm going to just say lock storage so we know what it is. Oh, no capitals. Let's forget that. All right. And I am just going to go ahead and go through validation to deploy this because, again, we're not using this for anything, just more to test the lock. So I am able to submit the deployment. The deployment is in progress. And let's go back to our resource group because by the time we get there, it should finish up deploying. Oh, right, and I got a deployment successful. Let's just go ahead and refresh, make sure. Oh. Go to resource. We have it. All right, perfect. So that was there. It let me create it in that resource group. There we go. So we can see that I was able to create a resource in the resource group. And that's because it's only a delete lock. Let's try deleting it. Now, you see, it is giving me this big, massive warning. Remember what I told you. When you delete it, it's gone. You're not getting it back. So it wants to make sure that I understand this. And I actually have to type out the name of the resource group to say, I understand. So I'm going to select delete. Oh, won't let me. It's because it has a lock. All right. So you can see I can make changes. But let's go edit this lock real fast. Let's change it to read only. All right, let's go try to add a storage account again. I'm gonna go ahead and add a storage account. Have my subscription. Let's select my resource group. Oh, it's stopping me. This resource group is read only, so I can't even get to validation process before it stops me. And that's because I have that read-only lock. Let's just do one final test. Go to my resource groups. We'll select AZ900. Delete resource group. There's that warning. I cannot emphasize it enough. It will go bye-bye forever. So let's do AZ900. Delete. Oh, it won't let me. Now, again, I can go and remove those locks because of my access. But again, you can control your users to control whether or not they can make any changes on the locks. All right. So going back to our slide deck, just remember adding locks to your resources are such an important thing if you want to prevent any type of accidental deletion or modification, and it's a great governance tool. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at tags. We've had the option to look at this a couple times. You know, you looked at it yesterday with Lorraine. With tags, again, this is a great tool when it comes to reporting or billing. And essentially what you're doing is you're adding metadata for your Azure resources. Now, tags do not have that parent-child inheritance relationship. So if you tag a resource group, all of the items below it will not have those tags. So instead of having to go through and manually add tags, that's where taking advantage of templates is really great because you can have all of those tags automatically built in. Now, where this is really helpful, let's say, for example, switch back to the portal. Let's go take a look. Let me remove that lock real fast. That way if I need to make any changes. All right, so let's go and look at this storage account, for example. Now we don't have anything in the storage account at the moment, but underneath overview, I can select tags. And this is where I can add that name value pair. So if I wanted to do cost center, and maybe it's 5642 is the cost center, we can have the manager. And let's say the manager's name is Blake. So that way, when I add these tags, if I then get my bill and I go, whoa, this bill is crazy expensive. What happened? And I want to go in and I see, 5642, that cost center spent a little bit more than they should have. What is that? Why is that? And then I drill down even deeper and I see that Blake, the manager, is the one who has spent more. Well, maybe we have a conversation about budget. Maybe we put additional policies in place. Maybe we change access. So again, this is really good for organizing your billing, your reporting. Essentially, it's organizing all of your resources based off these tags, and that name value pair allows you to filter on those. In general, you can have up to 50 tags per resource, but if you're adding a lot of tags, highly recommend that you take advantage of those templates, those JSON files. All right, so mentioned it a couple times, but we have Azure Policy. So what Azure Policy does, this is a really common question that comes up, is how can I prevent my users from maybe selecting a really expensive virtual machine? Or how can I prevent my users from using a SKU that doesn't meet our company standards or perhaps our company policies, or I don't want to deploy outside of these regions? Well, Azure Policy is what's going to be your best support for that, because essentially you get to set what your organizational standards are, and these policies will automatically enforce those across your subscription. Now, like with everything else, you have a choice whether or not you want to apply it at the subscription level, management group level, resource level, or a resource group level. So it is up to you. There are a number of pre-built policies, basically the definition of the policy. So whether you wanted to have like an allowed storage account SKU, maybe it's only specific resources. And again, you can make it only specific people can deploy, allowed virtual machine SKUs. Again, there's a lot of sample or built-in policies that you can choose from. So let's actually go to our resource group. I'm just going to back out to our AZ900 resource group. And I don't have any policies associated with it, but let's actually create a whole policy that applies to the entire subscription. So I actually have it up here in my recently accessed services, but you can find it in the search bar or the portal doc. So let's go ahead and select policy. And this is where you can see your overall policy scores. Now, in my current Azure environment, I don't have anything really crazy in here. You can see I have one existing policy. I'm actually not compliant with it. And I want to point out one thing with your compliance score. When you deploy a new policy, it will not go back and stop anything that's out of compliance. So if I, for example, actually, let's go ahead and build it out. So let's create an assignment and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I am going to assign a new policy to my entire subscription. So I am selecting my scope here. I can choose to do it at a resource group level if I'd like, but nope, I'm going to apply it to my entire resource group. I can then choose to add any exclusions if, like, maybe, for example, I wanted to exclude my AI 100. I can do that. But for this one, nope, I'm going to include all of my resource groups. Now, with the policy definition, I'm going to use a pre-built-in definition. So I am going to actually look specifically for a location. So I'm going to just type in location, built-in, allowed location. So you can see this is basically restricts where I can deploy resources. So I'm going to select allowed locations. I'm going to leave the name. Now, this is where I'm going to select what locations I can actually deploy in. And I'm going to choose Japan West. All right. Now, everything that I have done up to this point, I usually deploy in East US. Because I am now saying I can only deploy in Japan West, when it runs its compliance check, it will not stop all my other resources that are deployed outside of Japan West. However, they will be marked as out of compliance. Moving forward, however, if I try to deploy any resource in Japan West, it will stop me. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to hit review and create. Now, that policy has been deployed. Now, because it was just started, let me go back to the policy. Oops. And I go to overview. You'll see that it says not started. So right now it says I'm 100% compliant. That's not the case. Probably we'll go back and check in about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. It would show, I probably have a number of my resources that are out of compliance. But you see that it's not started. So all of my old resources will be showed out of compliant, but let's actually try to create a new one. So let's create another storage account. They're nice and easy. I'm going to do add. We're going to add this to my AZ900. We'll do our policy test storage 1. Let's see if that's not taken. All right. I'm going to just leave everything as is. Now it's going to say validation passed, but look what happens when I try to deploy in East US. It's going to try to go through deployment. Ooh, it won't let me deploy. And you see what's going on right here? It says my deployment's failed because I am deploying in a non-allowed location. So even though all my other ones, we see my status is forbidden here, even though all my other resources will be out of compliant, because I've now set up that policy of that allowed location, I can't go back and add anything after that. All right. So this is really great because it's going to automatically manage your Azure environment based on the rules and the parameters that you set up. All right. So moving on through governance, let's go ahead and talk about Azure Blueprints. Now, this is something, if you are part of the DevOps team, you will love Azure Blueprints, because essentially what it does is it makes a blueprint of your Azure environment, and it saves all of your existing role assignments, the policy assignments like what we just set up, any templates, any resource groups, and it allows you to deploy test environments or development environments very quickly, where you're not having to go through the entire build out of setting up an Azure environment. So this is really good when you have to test different things. This allows you specifically when you're looking at compliance or you have your already built-in components. Again, it's just there to help orchestrate different Azure resources specifically for your development team. One thing I want to point out is Azure Blueprints are a little bit different from your Azure Resource Manager templates. And Lorraine took a look at those yesterday with you. So one thing I want to point out, so when you deploy an ARM template, there's no relationship with the deployed resource and where it came from. But with the Azure Blueprint, every deployment is going to be tied to that blueprint package. So there is a relationship with the resources, and they're going to be continuously maintained even after deployment. And again, this is really important when it comes to auditing and tracking the capabilities of your development environments. So for this one, I believe AZ300 goes into more detail on Azure Blueprints if you'd like to learn more about that. The last thing before we get into some of our privacy and compliance, I want to talk about the Cloud Adoption Framework. Now, this is a great tool if you are new to Azure. and you would like support or best practices on how to implement Azure in your own environment. So essentially, this is the Microsoft approach to implementing Azure. And there's so many tools from both employees, partners, customers that have been all put into one a cloud adoption framework tool that will provide guidance as you go through. This is something that can be really helpful if you've never worked in the cloud before, or if you have a large workload, or you just don't know where to start. You know, do I want to do a lift and shift? Do I want to re-architect to make my applications PaaS compatible? You know, what do I need? So this will help you go through everything that you need to set up your Azure environment. Highly recommend. Now that we've looked at some of the the governance, I want to talk about the compliance, privacy, and the data protection standards that are offered to you and your data when it's stored in Azure. So one of the first things that we have to talk about is security, privacy, and compliance are at the foundation of everything we do here at Microsoft. So everything that we design, every service that we design, security is built. Security is part of that development process. So we want to make sure that we're always providing you with the latest and greatest security tools. And we took a look at some of those in the last module. Next is with privacy. You know, we want to make sure that not only we're meeting our contractual obligations to you, but we also want to be transparent. And we'll take a look at the Trust Center in a little bit, so that way you can see, you know, we provide all of our audit reports where these are third-party audit reports that you can download and see what we're doing, where we provide other resources. So not only we want to give you the control over your data and provide you with that privacy, but we're transparent in what we're doing with it. And last but not least, you know, we are global. That's one of the benefits of going with a cloud computing provider. But we are very aware of local laws, regulations, and we want to provide a comprehensive coverage with all of our compliance offerings. Now, with our compliance offerings, we have quite a few. So when we look at our documentation, Azure actually provides the most comprehensive set of any compliance offerings from any cloud provider. And I mean, this is including our certificates, our attestations, all of that. So no matter what cloud provider you're going with, there's a couple of questions that you need to ask. One, how compliant is the cloud provider when it comes to handling sensitive data? You should know that. Next, you know, what are the services that are offered by that cloud provider when it comes to compliance? And how can you deploy your own cloud-based solutions and still remain compliant? Because it is, at the end of the day, your responsibility to make sure that your resources are compliant. Your cloud provider, though, is going to help support that. Now, when it comes to Azure's compliance documentation, like we said, it provides the most comprehensive set. And we have global compliance offerings, U.S. government offerings, industry, and regional. And you can actually see all of that at in our docs.microsoft. But when we take a look at the Trust Center, I'll show how you can pull up all of that compliance documentation. All right. Like we said, privacy is also huge. So not only we want to make sure we're compliant, but we want to make sure that you as our customer or anyone who interacts with Microsoft knows what we do with your data, how we process it, why we're processing it. So all of that can be found in the privacy statement. And pull that up again, the Trust Center, which we'll look at, will have all of this information. So not only with the privacy statement, we also have our data protection addendum. So all of our terms will show you, you know, what we're collecting, the licensing terms with all of your Microsoft programs or software that you purchase, and then how we are protecting your data. So let's go ahead and look at that Trust Center. I've mentioned that a couple times now. This is your home base for everything related to privacy, trust, and compliance. Not only that, there is curated reading material or documentation or reports specific for those who may be in manager roles, administrator roles, anybody who works in risk, legal, There's a lot of great information. It's also where you can access all of your compliance documents, the privacy statement. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Trust Center. All right. So the way that you get to the Trust Center is by going to www.microsoft.com/Trust Center. And let's just take a look at a couple of the items that we looked at first. So we talked about our compliance documentation. So if I go up here to compliance and I click on compliance offerings, you can then search for all of the different compliance offerings that we offer through Azure. Now, one of the things I do want to have you know is that not every Azure service offers every single compliance offering. For example, we do have a separated instance of Azure specifically for US government. So non-US government Azure will not offer FedRAMP, for example, but it's not needed outside of US government. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But that is where you can find all of your compliance offerings. Going back to the Trust Center, we also have our privacy statement. So this is where you can go and actually check out the full privacy overview. And you can read the privacy statement, any of the data that we collect, as well as additional resources. So if you want a little extra bedtime reading and understanding where your data comes from, the Trust Center has all of that here for you. The other thing, like I said, this is where we have our compliance scores, all of our audit reports, all of that is available to you to download, to read. And again, like I said, these are third-party audit reports that allow you to see how Microsoft is stacking up. Because again, you want to make sure that not only are you compliant, but your cloud provider is compliant as well. So this is really a great site to come in and explore. You can read from the blog. Brad Smith is also a really great person to check out his blog. Again, just so much information and additional resources. So definitely the Trust Center is somewhere that you want to check out. It's specifically if your role requires you to protect your data information, but I think it's good for everyone to be aware. Last two things that I want to discuss before we wrap up this module. We have two separate instances of Azure. The first one being, like I mentioned, is our US government services. Now, this is a completely separate physical instance of Azure. So this isn't connected with any of the other data centers, and you can only access it if you are authorized to. So me, as Chelsea, right now, I could not deploy in our Azure regions. Part of the reason that they're separate is from a privacy and a security standpoint, but they also have their own compliance offerings. So like I said, we have the FedRAMP, the NSIT, very specific to either state, local, or federal government. And then lastly, we have our China region. So because China has their own data residency requirements, their own compliance requirements, one of that is that in order to have Azure cloud services, that it has to be operated through 21 ViaNet. And so again, this is all physically separated from the rest of Azure, and it's operated through 21 ViaNet. And this ensures that all the data stays within China and meets all their data compliance regulatories as well as data residency. That brings us to the end of Module 5. And now we have a really great idea of different ways of how you can govern your own Azure environment. Really, everything in Azure is fully customizable through the multi-factor authentication, Azure Active Directory, and all the other identity services we talked about. We also took a look at some of the policy features and the blueprint options within Azure. That way you can see how you can manage your own environment and make sure those who are in it are following your company policies. Then finally, we closed out where we showed you some of the compliance offerings that Microsoft as a cloud provider has available for you as a customer. And then we also looked at Azure China and Azure Government in case you do need to deploy in those specific areas or those regions that have those data residency requirements. It's been a busy day so far, so why don't we go ahead and take a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll wrap up with our final module, Module 6, which is pricing and support. I'll see you back here after the break.